Hello there, friends. This is Spencer Michaud, and today we're going to be talking about the Venus retrograde cycle in Aries and then back into Pisces. So I hope that you're having a wonderful afternoon out there. Hope that you're doing excellent. We are going to be kind of taking a look at Aries symbolism. We're going to take a look at how Venus moves through the zodiac in relationship to the sun and what it might mean for us personally and collectively. Let me know if you're here today. Please put something in the chat. Let me know if you're stopping in, where you're stopping in from. It's always nice to see all my friends here in the chat. So welcome all of you today. So just a few announcements before we start diving into it. You can find me over at spencermichaud.com if you are interested in booking a reading. If you are trying to figure out what this all means for you personally, collectively, etc., it's a great way to reach out. Click on the Book Now button. I can help break this down and contextualize it for all of you. And I always appreciate working with all of you. So check that out. Check me over at spencermichaud.com. I also have a webinar coming up with my lovely partner, Tanya Andrews, Dignity and Devotion. We're going to be breaking down Mars. And we're going to be doing that on Saturday, April the 12th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We go over the myths. We go over the Mars and the different dignities and debilities, how to work through those things. We're going to be talking about the decans as well. We're going to talk also about how to create a ritual practice so that you can maybe mitigate some of the challenging significations of Mars if you have difficulty with that planet. You can also check out Tanya over at Third Coast Mojo. She has some really cool stuff up that is brand new. She has some Sun and Leo materia that I think would be excellent for you for putting yourself out there into the world. It's a great small local business that you can support. If you're participating on the economic blackout today on Friday the 28th, it's good to support those local businesses if you're trying to vote with your dollars. So I hope that you'll support her over there. And then finally, if you want to subscribe to the newsletter, you get a 10% discount off of any reading over at spencermichaud.com. So click the link in the description of this video or wherever you're listening to the podcast today and sign up for the newsletter. All right, friends. So those are our announcements. Uranus Ascending is here. It says Hola from Cancun. Oh my goodness, on a vacation there. Friend, I believe Uranus Ascending is normally joining us from Aurora, Illinois, but getting some sunshine, that sounds nice. I could use some sun myself, friend. Taku says, hello, Spencer. Happy Friday. Greetings from Germany. Nice to see you, Taku. Hope you're doing well, my friend. It's always lovely to see my European friends joining us and for our friends from down under in New Zealand and from Finland. Moi to all my Finnish friends and all my Canadian friends and anyone around the world. We're hopefully a global community here. Uranus Ascending says, yes, vacation. Wish you were here. Yeah, it sounds like a beautiful experience. It's kind of cloudy, windy, and cold here in the Midwest of the United States and Michigan. So I'm looking forward to spring. I'm getting a little bit of that spring fever, a little bit of the itch to start gardening and getting outside. So I'm glad you're getting a recharge there, my friend. All right. So friends, we're going to be talking about Venus retrograde today. We have Venus stationing as I am recording this Friday, February the 28th. I believe it's going to be stationing retrograde tomorrow, but it's slowing down. It's getting ready to change directions. It's an interesting time for reflecting on our values, for reflecting on how we create harmony and peace, for what we're attracted to or what is attracted to us, our powers of attraction. This is a process where Venus is going to be going into the heart of the sun, going under the beams, going into the heart of the sun, getting renewed, being stripped of all of her adornments on some level. We'll talk about the myth of Inanna today and the different stages of Inanna's descent into the underworld to visit her sister Ereshkigal. And I think that we may be in for a week or two of some challenging experiences, but hopefully it will help us to get something reborn, a birth of something new. I was reflecting a little bit on previous Venus retrograde cycles in Aries. I had some rough ones. There was a Venus retrograde cycle in 2017. I lost a cherished feline companion that I'd had for about 10 years. They passed over the Rainbow Bridge when Venus was retrograding in Aries. It did lead to the new companions that I have, my little cats Gandalf and Radagast. I think that was part of the retrograde cycle. I had to let go of something to bring something new into my life, and that might be something that we might be reflecting on here as well. Previously, 2009 or so, early 2009, you could see a pattern here. It's about 8-year cycles that we're going to be seeing Venus retrograding in a similar area of the zodiac. I had a serious knee injury during that period of time. I was playing basketball. This was back when I was a little bit younger and still did things like that. But I was playing a pickup game of basketball with a bunch of college kids, and just tore my knee straight up really bad during that period of time. And it was during the beginning of my relationship with my current partner, and it was a difficult period, but that experience kind of brought us closer together. Like it accelerated our commitment to one another. She was very helpful during that period of time, since she kind of took care of me during that period of time. And so I guess I'm using this as examples of, we may be experiencing some difficulties, but they could be leading potentially to some breakthroughs and to something new, something that we're going to beginning once again, that could be bring some beautiful experiences into our lives. We got some more friends stopping in here. Paintings by Mare is here. Hi from Maine. Hello, Mare. How you doing, friend? I hope that you're creating something wonderful while you're listening today. Susanna is here. Moi moi, my friend from Finland. Hope you're doing well, and that the little bat that you rescued is flying off into into the treetops as we speak. Susanna sent me a picture of a beautiful little bat friend that she made, and we talked about that symbolism. Bat is an interesting one for Venus retrograde, because bat talks about transformation, death and rebirth, shamanic rebirth on some level. And that's what we're going to be seeing with Venus going into the heart of the sun, as sort of a rebirth of the Venusian energies. But sometimes we have to go face the dark night of the soul beforehand. Uranus Ascending says, I lost my mom during the 2017 Venus retrograde. Yeah. Sometimes we do have to give things up during this period of time. There's reversals. There's sometimes a benefic during these periods can take back that which is given. So we'll talk about that. I've got some nice quotes from Demetra George here to contextualize some of the retrograde. I have some slides from the Venus webinar that my partner and I did, where we talked kind of at length about Venus retrograde, and we'll outline all of the different points in the cycle for you. Paintings by Mare says, my partner John is dealing with a knee injury. I'm his caretaker after surgery. Well, there you go. Like, history repeats, right? His ripples. Well, that's a beautiful thing that you're doing, Mare. And I know that, despite the difficulty and the circumstances and the pain that he might be experiencing, sometimes crisis can bring us closer together. And I-Ching was talking about this a little bit today, about the ability of fellowship and union, the ability to gather together even during difficult times. Sometimes difficult times are the galvanizing force that help us to find harmonious ways of interacting with one another. Susanna, nice bat emoji there, absolutely. Uranus says, one of my kids got married during Venus retrograde in 2009. It lasted less than a year. I think that is one thing that we do have to be careful of. If we begin a relationship, or if we commit to something, to a purchase or something of that nature, our tastes might be different when the retrograde cycle is over. So not to say that there aren't beautiful relationships that have begun or started or lasted with Venus retrograde. There are plenty that exist, but sometimes it can just be that a change of heart is happening one way or the other. As we're recording this, we're in the middle of a one-day economic blackout from big corporations such as Amazon, Walmart, Target, etc. It's sort of a buy nothing day. There will be longer economic protests in the month ahead, but think about like how we utilize and buy things is sort of a Venusian kind of thing. We're attracted to things, we're bringing things into our experience, and right as Venus is stationing, there's a big movement towards saying, no, we're not going to bring things into our experience. We're doing this because of our values. And this is one of the things that we're going to talk a lot about today with Venus, especially with it retrograding in Aries too, which has a lot to do with our values and the royal decrees that we make about what we believe in and what we're willing to stand for or not stand for. So something to consider. Yeah. Stephen is here. Hello, Stephen. Nice to see you. How you doing, friend? Paintings by Mare says we both have Venus, 4 degrees of Scorpio. We are very close and supportive of each other in all ways. Oh, that's good. You know, I mean, and here's the thing, like any Venus can have powers of attraction, can lead to harmonization. Just because Venus is in a Mars ruled sign like it is for the two of you, it's Scorpio, and with Venus in the Mars ruled sign of Aries right now, doesn't mean we can't smooth things over. It just means that the tools that we have are a little bit different. With Venus in Aries, the tools are very yang. There's a yang force. There's an aggressive pursuing action that is somewhat antithesis to the way we normally consider Venus being letting things come to her and becoming a magnet for things. Although there are different ways of thinking about that, especially when we look at Venus as a morning star versus an evening star. But with Scorpio, you know, Scorpio is utilizing that crisis energy, you know, being able to understand and bond maybe over loss, over things that you are letting go, things that need to be let go of, attraction to things that may suggest death or other worlds or things of that nature. There's a lot of different ways to live in this world and to utilize Venusian energies. Steven says, I'm doing well, preparing for this big shift. Station retrograde happens tomorrow. Absolutely, friend. Yeah, so Steven's got a natal Venus in Pisces, so it'll retrograde back into Pisces briefly, and we'll break all that down for you. It's going to be a busy month astrologically ahead. A lot going on. It may be a slow month, even though we are getting to the point where we have this spring equinox coming up. We have both Venus and Mercury stationing retrograde or retrograding through March. And we also have 4 Hellenistic void of course moon periods, which can make things pretty slow, you know. Stephen says, my solar return is tomorrow. Well, happy birthday, Stephen. And or early birthday. Hope that many happy returns to you, friend. Okay, so let's start breaking this down. We'll bring our chart up and we'll take a look at it. Try to give you as many details and ways to contextualize it as I possibly can. Here we are looking at Venus as she stations retrograde on March 1st, Saturday, March 1st, 7:36 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at 10 degrees of Aries with the moon applying to it. So not only do we have a retrograde station, we have the moon kind of activating this and making it even more potent. This is going to be hosted by Mars in Cancer. So we have a square from the host of Venus right now. And sometimes that can be a challenging relationship between its hosts. I mean, I guess the good news is the host is witnessing. In Hellenistic astrology, if a planet is on either side of the sign that the planet is in, or either side of the opposition of the sign that the planet is in, that's said to be an aversion. And that was a challenging that was a challenging situation for a planet. But with the planet square, we may have some friction, but there's at least some kind of line of communication, even if it's an argument or like with raised voices or something of that nature. Now, Mars in Cancer is said to be in its fall, a place where it is at the bottom of the Wheel of Fortune, a difficult place for Mars. So not only do we have Venus in a place that it isn't necessarily quite always happy in, or able to utilize its preferred resources. You know, the ability to see things from other people's perspective, the ability to compromise. We also have Mars in a place that it's not necessarily comfortable in, a place where it is trying to utilize the resources of things that would normally bring us security and comfort, and its agenda is to sever and separate. So we've been seeing over the course of Venus's transit through Aries already a lot of severing and separating of things that would normally bring people comfort and security. This is happening with the many of the cuts that are happening in America, and probably with some global events as well. So difficult position for both of these planets to be in. So if we go over and we kind of take a look at, let's just take a look at Aries 2 first, and we'll go back and I'll take you through the dates. But let's see what we're dealing with Aries 2. We've got a few more friends stopping in here, so I want to welcome them here. We can't see the chart. Can you see the chart now, Taku? Uh-oh, the chart isn't showing? Okay. Can you see that chart? I just want to make sure you can see it. Now it's showing. Okay. So let's go over back to the decans. Okay. This looks like we're back up. That's good. But yeah, I appreciate if there's something on my end that you're not seeing, definitely let me know, because I don't want to be speaking about something you can't see. You know, we've had some interesting technical challenges over the last few weeks, but hopefully we'll get through this one not too in good shape. We've got an exiled and fallen Mercury that we've been doing these under the auspices of the last few weeks, but you know, we make do, and sometimes things aren't perfect, but thank you for bringing that to my attention. Robin is here. What's up, Robin? Nice to see you. Hope you're doing well, friend. And no worries about being late. We're kind of on non-linear time today on some level. Okay. Let's see. Now it's showing good. Mare says, I love listening while painting. So helpful in these challenging times. Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about Aries 2. So Aries 2, you see the Three of Wands, a figure that is sending his ships out into the harbor or out to be delivered somewhere. Book T calls this the Lord of Established Strength. The Book of Thoth calls it the Lord of Virtue. Austin Coppock calls it the Crown, and that's a reference to it being a solar decan and it being the containing the sun's maximum degree of exaltation at 19 degrees of Aries. So it's a very royal decan. We saw earlier with Aries 1 the Lord of Dominion. So if I back up for just a second, because this is going to be retrograding back into Aries 1, you've got a figure that some have likened to Alexander the Great, thinking about how he's going to dominate new territory, etc., like kind of this expansion, global expansionism that we saw with Alexander the Great in those times, and echoes that we're seeing with some of the rhetoric that's been coming out of the American administration about expanding our land into Canada or into Greenland, etc. Not that I condone those actions. It's interesting that that's coming out of the Venus and Aries 1 period potentially. So I just wanted to contextualize this with, we start with this severing and separating, but also this domination type of energy. And once we have established a new territory, here we find ourselves in Aries 2, where we're trying to govern that. Now, we haven't had Venus in Aries 2 for very long. It's only been there for like the beginning of this week or so. And we are probably starting to ask ourselves, what kind of values do we have? What kind of values how are we gonna vote with our dollars? This is some of the things that we've been talking about today with the economic blackout. Is a lot of people are pushing back on their on the powers that be, I guess you could say, people that are feeling that we are descending into a corporate kleptocracy, and seeing the rise of authoritarianism and fascism, and sort of pushing back on that in a way that oligarchs can understand, which is money. So that to me is very fascinating. So this themes in this deck in royalty, personal sovereignty, establishing character, values, and decrees. Bria and Atsaluth, concretizing inspiration. So it's concrete actions that come from an inspiring place. Benevolent rulership can be something that you can aspire to in this particular decan. It doesn't always mean that that's what we see, but we can aspire towards it. Creating your own world. This decan's interesting because it seems to be powerful, at least magically, for being able to create a sense of your own reality that doesn't even necessarily match up with the consensus reality. So, there was a post that was circling this week that was very disturbing, that showed the President of the United States and his golden idols on the Western Bank of the Middle East. And, it had this kind of Casino Royale type of vibe to it. And it just seemed like a creation of someone creating from their own world that was not even remotely connected to consensus reality. And I thought that was interesting, a manifestation of that. So when we see the Venus moving through this and stationing retrograde, we may see some of these royal decrees that have been made or over the last week, or some of the severing and separations that we've been seeing being taken back. Over the course of the past few weeks in America, we've seen executive order after executive order, which are basically royal decrees. We've seen the President of the United States post a fake magazine cover of himself wearing a crown saying, "Long live the king," which, if you're a student of American history, the ideal here is that we had no kings. So I think that the Venus retrograde cycle may be pushing back on the idea of kingship, of royalty, of some of the decrees that have been made, maybe hastily, things of that nature. And it's helping us as a community to establish our own values and to establish what we will and will not put up with. So questions to ask yourself, just with Aries too, how can you clarify and announce your values, right? Sometimes that may involve saying what you are not. If you say, I am not part of this new centralized power, belief system, etc., what actions can you take to define that you are not in support of it? So these are things we're going to be discussing. How will you rule and serve in this new territory with dignity? We may have to establish our own territories on the fringes when we are working outside of an establishment that is exploitive. Where can you establish independence and self-governance? I think this one's really important. I think that as the United States government is being stripped and dismantled and sold off for parts, while we are trying to intimidate our allies into mineral deals or things of that nature, but basically blackmailing our allies into bending to our will through things like tariffs, etc. We may have to figure out how, as a people, as masses, we are going to support one another when the the powers that be are trying to take apart the support systems that supported people in the past, or at least in theory were supposed to support people in the past. So we may have to start establishing more grassroots movements, things of that nature, more localization, buying local, things of that nature. All of those things are on the table when we're trying to discover how to be more self-sufficient and not as dependent on corrupt powers. Where do you make your own rules? Where can you start establishing the world that you want to see rather than the one that is disintegrating around you? What skill set does healthy leadership require? This is a good question, because oftentimes when we have leaders and examples, human nature is to mimic people that have power. And we have seen this over the course of the last, few years, where people are starting to mimic toxic leadership. And how do we start reestablishing benevolent leadership and mimic the leaders that take into account the needs of their constituents, instead of just their self-centered needs? How do we mimic a leadership that is working for the people instead of working for themselves? And these are good questions to ask. These are things that we have to consider. And this is not just an American-centric question. This is a question that we can reflect upon globally. What does positive leadership look like? What I have learned, in my time, sometimes being in some positions of leadership, is that it works out better when you are tuning into what your community needs and then taking action based on those values. When you try to take action based on your own self-centered values, that always tends to rebound back on you, because there's no reason for the collective to support that, because they don't benefit from it. So I think that these are interesting questions to reflect upon. And then finally, how can you take responsibility for your own power? What I love about the synchronicity of the first of an economic protest happening just as Venus is stationing is it does feel to me like the people attempting to take back some kind of power, agency, and control. What I have been hearing from the milieu, from friends, and feeling, quite honestly, is it is overwhelming when we start to feel disempowered, right? When there are things that are happening, changes that happen so quickly that we're just trying to make sense of it, that chaos can feel very disempowering. To me, this is a take back. This is a take back of our own personal sovereignty, where we aren't necessarily reliant on those fascist leaders that are perpetuating corruption, and say, hey, we actually do have some agency. We actually do have some power to push back on forces that we don't agree with. So that is a really interesting journey that I'm really curious to see how it plays out during the Venus retrograde cycle. Again, today's economic blackout is only one day, and it's just I think it's an awareness raising thing, where there's going to be longer ones moving forward. I believe from March 7th to the 14th, there's an Amazon blackout for an entire week. Maybe the appropriate way to engage with this is to, if this is something that you are able to do, and I know that this isn't possible for everyone. Like sometimes, like a place like Walmart or Target is one of the only places in a community where you can get certain things. But maybe trying to wean ourselves off of large corporate organizations for the long term. This could be a way to initiate some of those actions, to relocalize, to be able to start weaning ourselves off of supporting the billionaires that are exploiting our labor, that are trying to turn our taxes into filling their own pockets instead of providing the services that they're supposed to provide for the collective. It's a really interesting time. So that's Aries 2. You know, Venus is going to be retrograding back into Aries 1. So we may be asking some questions when it moves back into Aries 1 about some of the cuts that have been made, the severing and separating that has been made. This is a word that Robert Schmidt was talking about for Mars, okay? And Venus is this attraction to individualism, right? This attraction to yang and extreme masculinity. Not to say that those things inherently can be wrong or bad. It just means that sometimes when we idolize these things and at the expense of other ways and other ways of being, that's when they turn into the toxic forms that we are seeing play out in the collective right now. So just some themes to consider with Venus through Aries 1. And this is going to happen, you know, within a few days. I'll show you. This will take you through the dates, but severing the umbilical cord, splitting of the one, cellular mitosis, raw force, undiluted yang, the sperm breaking through the wall of the ovum, the bursting of the seed husk, you know, chainsaws being wielded symbolically by sick individuals. So questions you could ask yourself when Venus is moving through Aries 1. How can you individuate? What is not you? What do you reject? Right? What do you say, hey, this isn't me. I'm not a part of this. I don't want to participate in this, whatever this is to you. How can you break new ground? Right? Where is brute force necessary and where is it excessive? What new territory do you want to conquer? Okay. Now this could be personally, and I think that the language of early 20th century, late 19th century, early 20th century, when we were establishing some of these tarot themes, you know, calling this the Lord of Dominion, we had a lot of the kind of manifest destiny powers, kind of colonialism and things of that nature. Not to say that those things are completely eradicated. They obviously aren't, since they are starting to circle back around again. But it is an opportunity to think about, how do we start shifting that language? What does it mean to conquer in a way that is benevolent? What does it mean to personally break new ground and to make a new start in a way that doesn't create the collateral damage that we often see associated with Aries 1? You know, this is the indiscriminate cutting. To me, this is a really fascinating exploration, because the political climate has been one of just mass destruction of cultural and systemic norms. And one of the things that they talk a lot about with Venus, not just Venus, but with Aries and with Mars in Aries and things of that nature, is the type of severing and separating that is indiscriminate. Like, it's like a berserker that's going in and just mowing things down. And sometimes there's things that you don't want to be mown down in that in the wake of that destruction. Whereas, like, just conversely, if you look at the way Mars might function through the sign of Scorpio, it is a yin force. It is a scalpel. It's a very pinpointed attack, because it is trying to defend a dying life force rather than an emerging youth, right? So we've got just all this fiery energy that is happening with Aries. But with Scorpio, it's more about how do we sustain something rather than begin something new. And it's a very different experience. So we may be questioning some of these like efforts towards initiating, but the initiations that have created a lot of damage to our social structures. Okay. And finally, Venus is going to retrograde back into Pisces 3 at some point. I'll give you dates for all of this in a second. But this is this is where Venus is going to actually gain a lot of dignity, going to move back into its exaltation, and it's going to be conjoining Neptune. So there may be some very idealistic experiences that we have during this retrograde period, at least towards the end of it, after we go through the Cazimi and the heart of the sun. But I'll come back to this because I think it'd be better to contextualize it with some dates. So let's bring our, can everybody see the chart again? Let me just make sure that we are able to see it. Okay. So the retrograde itself, it stations retrograde on the 1st. Again, we've talked about that as a planet or a person taking to their sickbed. You know, the medieval astrologers thought of it as the planet as like having difficulties. I'll read something from Demetra George that can contextualize this. This is on page 287 of Ancient Astrology in Theory and Practice, Volume 1, which is a really beautiful book. I really enjoy this book. This is in a section called Interpreting Retrograde Motion. Hellenistic and medieval astrologers considered a retrograde planet moving extremely slowly and backwards to be a problematic condition. Paulus says that when planets are retracing their paths, their influences are useless, unfavorable for action, and insignificant. Dorotheus writes that a planet in retrograde motion signifies difficulty and misfortune in the native and others. Even Saul relates that a retrograde planet signifies disobedience, contradiction, and diversity or discord. This rebellious quality can be seen in the erratic visual movements of its retrograde loop, speeding up at the opposition and pushing the envelope as it moves beyond the normative boundaries of the ecliptic. The Greek word for retrograde is anapadizio. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, which means to step or go back, to call back, to recall. Robert Schmidt suggests that retrograde benefic planets take back what good they have given, and retrograde malefic planets do not give over anything in the first place. The medieval term impedited, I think that's it, had several related meanings. It was used to describe the retrograde predicament as well as an afflicted aspect condition. Impedited comes from the Latin impedire, roughly translated as to shackle or snare the feet, to impede. It indicates a retarding movement or progress through obstructions or hindrances. We might then say that a retrograde planet is not only moving very slowly towards its goal, but it is going backwards or in the opposite direction of accomplishing its objective. There exists some kind of hindrance or obstruction that inhibits the expression of its significations, or which provokes rebelliousness against the norms of consensus behavior. So that's pretty interesting, right? So we are definitely seeing the rise of rebellion against the establishment right now. And I think this is a period where you are going to see people pushing back against authoritarianism, against corporate overreach of power, and taking back some of that approval, if there ever was that. So the station happens on the 1st. We then have a VOC moon from the 10th, so we'll take it through here. You're going to see it's going to move back into the first decan on March 8th. Okay, so we've got the first week or so, it's moving very slowly back through the second decan of Aries. So those royal decrees being backtracked, being taken back. And then it moves back into the decan that we were describing as being one that is rejecting and severing and separating from the collective. So a lot of the cuts that we were seeing happening being taken back. And much of this may also coincide with legal judgments coming to the fore. There has been a number of court cases that have been filed because of the illegal nature of the Doge movement. So we might see some pushback from the legal system as well during this period of time. Stephen, this title of this book is Ancient Astrology in Theory and Practice, a Manual of Traditional Techniques by Demetra George. And it has 2 volumes to it. It's a really excellent instruction manual for all things Hellenistic. We got some more friends stopping in. Tarya is here. Moi Tarya. Hope you're doing well, friend. Seek Raj is here. How you doing, Raj? Nice to see you. Sorry, you're not late, friend. We're just we're discussing things. We had a little bit of a late start ourselves, so no worries. Lauren is here. Hello, Lauren. Hi, Spencer and Astro friends. How's it going? It's going okay. I think we're trying to contextualize the retrograde motion of Venus within the rise of authoritarianism and the populist movement and pushback towards the rejection of the oligarchy and the rejection of a kleptocracy. So we're having a good time doing that. So we're doing it with a smile on our face today, Lauren. We're bringing back power to the people. I think that's what we're trying to do today. Stephen says, I had that book on my wish list for some time. I'll buy it for my birthday. Well, Stephen, I hope you wait to buy it tomorrow and don't buy it from a large corporation. See if you can go directly towards Demetra's website or something like that to support her directly. Okay, so once we have Venus moving back through the first decan of Aries, then we are going to see the VOC moon. Now, this is interesting to me because there are 4 VOC moons during this month, okay? Now, this moon void, of course, happens in conjunction with the planned economic blackout / boycott of Amazon from March 7th to March 14th. So you can see here that there's going to be a big void of course moon where, you know, this is kind of a Hellenistic type of experience where they would say nothing would come of the matter. So nobody's going to be buying things, hopefully, from large corporations, perpetuating the wealth inequality and the wealth gap during this period of time. So an interesting side note here. On the 11th, this is where we have Mercury starting to come together here with Venus. So this is another, I think, a really important moment within the Venus retrograde cycle, because we have Mercury slowing way down to start to retrograde itself on the 15th. Okay, so to me, this is some really important messaging that may be coming out about the Venus retrograde cycle, and because we're going to be delivering the message of potential rebellion during this period of time. Maybe this is where this movement starts to gain steam and where people start to really see the effects of it, or where the corporations start to feel the pinch of it and maybe start to have discussions about changing their policies. That's really the goal of this. One of there's a lot of different reasons to protest. Like this could be in response to the current administration in America. It could be in response to these large corporations bending over and removing diversity programming from their, or protocols from their businesses. And as someone who promotes diversity and who has a global consciousness and not an American isolationist viewpoint, there's always been ways that we can push back on corporate quote unquote values. Corporations are motivated by their bottom line. And as we've seen in the past, there's performative support of things that we may support as supporters of diversity. They will try to monetize anything. Like you saw after the George Floyd experience in Minnesota, a lot of these corporations starting to jump on board with diversity because they knew that the public was in support of it at that time, right? And not that it's not in support of it now. It's just that they will try to bend to whatever they feel will make them the most money. So if people start becoming more vocal about not supporting these corporations that are trying to dismantle important programs that support people of various diverse backgrounds. The only way they're going to start hearing that is if they start losing money, right? And that's the purpose behind some of this. So this might be this time at the 11th of March where we may be starting to see the messaging starting to catch fire, I guess I would say. Now, Lauren is jumping right ahead here to the Saturn Cazimi, which I think is she has had a premonition, because there it is, on March the 12th. We're going to see Saturn Cazimi at 22 degrees of Pisces. So this is another one that I think is really fascinating to see Mercury and Venus coming together the same day or around the same day that Saturn is going to be renewed in the heart of the sun. So one of the things that Pisces 3 talks about is Pisces 3 is related to sacrifice. And as we've been talking today about rebellious movements, it may require some sacrifice. It may require sacrifice of our convenience. It may require some temporary sacrifice of the way that we've done things. It may require change. And I think that with this Saturn Cazimi moment, this could also reflect the changes that need to happen within the agreed upon blueprints and societies that we are a part of. Saturn is going through its own cleansing process during the Venus retrograde. I mean, this is a really, really active time astrologically, because Saturn will be under the beams. Like the norms of society will start to break down with Saturn under the beams. And Saturn's going through its own purging of its old cycle. Venus is going to be going through that similar cycle, purging of the old Venusian significations, getting ready for its own rebirth. Mercury will be going under the beams and burning off all of that dross to be able to have its own rebirth. So lots of rebirth happening, but it happens fairly slowly. When these inferior planets, Venus, Mercury, etc., are coming into the heart of the sun via retrograde motion, they're moving very slowly. When those same planets are moving into conjunction in their superior conjunction, direct, these planets, Venus and Mercury, have 2 Cazimi cycles, basically, whereas Saturn generally has 1, okay? Those planets will move very fast when they're direct. And I'll show you this when I bring up some of the slides from there. Cooley is here. Hello, Cooley. Should I stay in my current relationship, or is it time to peace out? That's a great question, Cooley. I mean, that's a question that you're going to have to answer for yourself. Oftentimes, Venus retrograde periods are ones where we start to question our commitments, where we are starting to have a change of heart when it comes to the things that we find attractive. So that it could be part of that. I guess what I will say, just in regard to your question, Cooley, is that I think it's important during the Venus retrograde periods to not necessarily take a rash action. I think it's important to ask some hard questions about your relationship and have some conversations. But I would wait until Venus is direct and maybe in a better position before even making that consideration. It's a good time for slowing down and reflecting, because you might change your mind when Venus stations direct. You might be like, I'm over this when Venus is retrograde, and then you're like, maybe I was being too hasty. But you are going to have to answer that, my friend. Okay. When we get to the 13th here, that's when we have Mercury and Venus going under the beams of the sun. So you can see here we have Venus about 15 degrees away. And I'd like to take this point in time to start talking about the Inanna myth. So here is a slide from our Venus webinar that my partner Tanya and I recently gave for Spencer Michaud astrology. And there are some excellent scholars that have compared the retrograde cycle, the synodic cycle of Venus, to the ancient Sumerian myth of Inanna and Ereshkigal. And I'll just read this to you for those of you who are listening on the podcast. It says, Inanna is among the oldest deities whose names are recorded in ancient Sumer. Inanna is the ancient Sumerian goddess of love, sensuality, fertility, procreation, and also of war. She was often depicted as the bright star of the morning and evening, correlating her with Venus, and also shown accompanied by or in the form of a lion or the 5 or 8-pointed star. One aspect of her mythology is that of a goddess of love and sexual attraction, but not as a goddess of motherhood. Instead, she was an independent and willful woman, using her beauty to manipulate and seduce others to have her way. She had many lovers. In one of her most important stories, she descends to the underworld, where her sister Ereshkigal rules. Arriving in her full queenly regalia, she is systemically stripped of everything until she reaches her destination, where she is killed and hung from a hook for her disrespect. After 3 days and nights, she is rescued by 2 entities who mourn and show compassion for Ereshkigal, who is grieving her dead husband, and in some interpretations also experiencing the pain of childbirth. Touched by this, she offers them a boon, and they are allowed to take Inanna's corpse back to the surface, and she is brought back to life. The story of descent and rebirth holds great significance for the synodic cycle of Venus. So Inanna shows us the stripping of her adornments, adornments being like jewelry, her clothes, all of the things that make her beautiful potentially. So we may be feeling like Inanna, a stripping of something, things stripped away. Maybe it's our attachment to convenience. Maybe during these periods of time, we feel like, well, we have to relinquish something that we normally relied upon, but it is for a higher purpose. She goes down there so that she can alleviate the suffering of Ereshkigal. So to me, this has significance for being able to give certain things up willingly, but for a greater purpose, for an eventual, hopefully, movement towards a higher purpose. Lawrence says, Chris Brennan has a great historical cast on Venus Retro that will help put context to much of what you're saying. I love both your focus on the present and your foresight. Oh, nice. I'll have to check that out. Devin is adding the suffering that Ereshkigal was partially responsible for. Yes, exactly. That's a good point. So there, part of that myth is, hold on a second. I got another slide here that we might be able to contextualize that. So here we see the phases in speed. Tell me more about that, Devin. Tell me more about your understanding of the Ereshkigal myth. We've got a little bit of a delay on here. Well, one of the things that we look at through this is, we'll come back to that. We will work through the different phases of Inanna's descent. But here we see a slide with Venus in exile, estrangement, occupying an opposite sign of their domicile, etc., associated with the spring equinox. This is our domicile of Mars, exaltation of the sun, but the exile of Venus and the fall of Saturn. We're also going to be exploring the exaltation of Pisces. We talked about that briefly, so I won't spend too much time here. But here we're getting to the synodic cycle. Devin says, Inanna had asked for the bull of heaven to fight a battle for her. That bull was Ereshkigal's husband. Okay, that's right. So we had a sacrifice, right? And she had to ask for forgiveness, basically, going into the underworld. what I find interesting about the Ereshkigal myth is the solution that Inanna came up with to alleviate Ereshkigal's suffering was just compassion, was just witnessing. And that really moved Ereshkigal to the point of allowing them to take her body back, etc. Or that was the mourners. The mourners had the I'm conflating all of the parts of this story. I apologize for that. But the mourners that were sent to retrieve Ereshkigal's body found Ereshkigal in the throes of childbirth or labor pains or something of that nature. And their compassion was moving to Ereshkigal to allow her to bring the body back to the surface. So a couple points of emphasis within the synodic cycle of Venus. So here we see, so Devin says also stripping her power away, stripping down from all her adornments. We mentioned that as she is entering under the beams of the sun. So Venus's synodic cycle takes about 584 days, 18 months. Here is one way of visualizing this. And you can see the inferior conjunction, which we are about to move towards. Okay, we have our moment of phasis, where it is retrograding under the beams of the sun and moving into the inferior conjunction. This is where Venus is moving in between the Earth and the sun. The superior conjunction is where it is on the other side, from our point of view, on the Earth. Now, we have different points within this that are different. Traditional astrologers said had different points of emphasis. We've got the combustion period where it is within 8 to 7.5 degrees of the sun, where it's really getting burned up. It's really debilitated in that state, even more so than when it is under the beams within 15 degrees of the sun. Now, the experience that we're having tomorrow, as I'm recording this, is what's called a moment of phasis, or an omen that speaks. So I would pay specific attention to things that you might experience over the course of the next 48 hours or so as we see Venus stationing retrograde. Often those can be omens that are speaking very loud to talk about the things that we may have to be giving up or things that may be stripped away. So this is a graphic that shows us more of the cycle. Where we are seeing today part C, which is the stationary retrograde to inferior conjunction, where it's moving very slow. Okay, it's going to move into that conjunction of the sun here, and then it will rise as the morning star. It's the transition of the evening star Venus to the morning star Venus. So this is the Mercury retrograde, the Mercury and Venus retrograde going under the beams of the sun as the beginning of that process at part C. Okay, this is the beginning of Inanna's descent. You've got the evening heliacal set with Inanna entering the underworld and being stripped of her powers. That's the period in between the phasis moment, the retrograde station, and the conjunction with the sun. Then you have the inferior conjunction, where it's hidden for 7 days, the death or initiation, Inanna being brought low and hung on the hook. And then it will go through its morning rise in the east and become Phosphorus or Lucifer, which is, basically means the bright shining one. First appearance. It will go through its rebirth phase. And when we see it stationing direct after 14 days, we can think of Inanna going home, returning home. And then we'll go through, greatest elongation, etc. But we won't go through all of that here today. We've got enough to unpack with just the station retrograde and the conjunction. All right, so Venus retrogrades happen about once every 18 months or so, and they last about 40 days at a time. So we've got sort of this 40 days and 40 nights type of experience with the flood of Noah and Moses receiving commandments, Jesus in the wilderness. These are all biblical references. Retrogrades generally cover the same 15 to 18 degrees 3 times, and you can see these beautiful patterns that it makes, this beautiful kind of flower of life. There is a relationship with Fibonacci sequences that nature, the growth in nature tends to mimic. This is one of the things I found very interesting with this research is the relationship of Venus with like the Empress card, for example. Venus as an earth goddess, and you can see like that her synodic cycle and the patterns that she makes in the sky are reflected here on earth and in nature itself. So as above, so below, as within, so without. It's kind of a nice connection there. So this might show areas in our relationships, as we were talking about with Cooley, that need to slow down or to reevaluate. Stress tests where you can learn about where you have to grow to move forward together or potentially part ways. It's chapter markers, right, that can show where you see sometimes the return of things from the past. You may see an ex that shows up to tie up some loose ends, or a family member you haven't talked to in a long time. That definitely can happen. Our tastes can change. I don't generally like to purchase like adornments during Venus retrograde because our taste might be just way out of left field during this period. So if you're like doing any home decorating or something like that, maybe it might be better to wait until Venus is direct or out of Aries or something of that nature. There can also be scandals, transgressions, transformations of norms or social rules, upheavals in fashion, taste, and relationships. And it can also show you where there might be a need for a pause or a break from the hard work that we're doing in some area of our life. Now, this may be present in your Aries house or Aries topic, but it could, if we bring back our chart here, it could also have an important effect, okay, on your Taurus area and your Libra area, because Venus is hosting both of those houses and topics. I would have a thought that it would probably have more of an effect on your Libra house because Venus is witnessing, even by opposition, and it's an aversion to your Taurus house. So there may be slightly less visible effects on the Taurus topic in your chart, but it will probably have a pretty significant impact on the Libra area of the chart. In this very arbitrary Libra rising chart, it's moving through the 7th house. So a Libra rising might be experiencing some revision or review in their partnership house, the 7th house, and that could have an impact on how they see themselves, how they see their own sense of empowerment and sovereignty. It may have a slight effect on their shared resources, but probably less of one than on their self-concept, if that makes sense. Yeah, Lauren says, don't paint every room of your house red while Venus is retrograde. Yeah, that's funny, Lauren. The one square job that I've had, the 40-hour, I've been kind of someone who's had weird jobs my entire life, but I had one like 40-hour a week job where I worked for, it was like a teen center, and I was trying to help teens like run a music concert venue. And I had a lot of attention problems at that period in my life, my late 20s, that I still struggle with, but it was very acute then. And I think the main thing I accomplished during that job was the office was painted red, and it was so unnerving and made me feel so terrible while I was in it that I painted the whole thing teal. That was like the big thing that I accomplished, was painting the office teal from red. So yeah, I can relate to that. And who knows if there was a Venus retrograde period around that? Well, who knows? I wasn't in that job for very long because, again, I don't have I just don't have a neurotypical relationship with the 9 to 5. So I'm a hothouse flower if you know your decan symbolism. Second decan Cancer, sun. I have a very specific environment that I'll thrive in, and if I'm outside of that environment, it's not always working out. Okay. Kai's here says physical tastes often change. Also, people preferring more or less sweetness. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so you might go outside of your comfort zone with food as well, right? Yeah, Venus definitely is everything that we are attracted to, whether it's food or adornments, things that bring us pleasure may be changing for sure. Painter says, I would say the switch from red to teal is a win for everyone. I think so. I think so. It was a very Cancerian moment. I was like, all right, I don't want to be burning up in the fire. I need to be under the ocean. That's what it was. So it was pretty funny. Steven says, my older brother painted one of his bathrooms red with red tile in the shower. Is he an Aries, Steven? Because that might be what might appeal to an Aries. Okay, so we've got the Mercury moving under the beams of the sun simultaneously with Venus. And let's see. Oh no. These are great comments. Devin says, Katie dreamed of making the liver cake last night. Oh wow. So we'll see how that turns out. That might be a Venus retrograde experience. It could be good, you know. It might be an abject disaster, but it could be something where you move outside the norm and maybe you discover something. It could be a point of discovery. Steven says, my older brother is a Leo. There you go. That would have been my second guess. Maybe as an Aries rising or something, or Aries moon. Cooley says, such a colorful chart. Do the colors signify anything? Well, in this chart, it's just a way of differentiating each of the signs of the zodiac. So we have just a sort of a rainbow ring that gives us a different shade for each sign and each house. Devin says that the liver cake is a Slavic wedding tradition. Oh, that's cool. So it has some personal meaning for her. That's great. So maybe it will be made with love, right? All right. Steven says his brother has a Scorpio rising with Mars and Cancer. Okay, that could make sense. Like, I think oftentimes being ruled by Mars, Mars has some tendencies. You often see Scorpio Gothic colors as black and red, right? Like death and blood. So that maybe that's the vibe he was going for. All right, well, but I digress. The other thing that's happening here, we're seeing Venus going under the beams, 8 degrees of Aries or so, around the 13th, right? So we have both of those planets going under the beams of the sun. We're going to be building up to a full moon lunar eclipse. So all of this is not happening in a vacuum, right? Venus going under the beams, Mercury going under the beams shortly afterwards, and then stationing retrograde, all coming on the feet of a lunar eclipse, full moon in Virgo 3. So we definitely are seeing chapter markers that are changing the narrative story. Virgo 3, associated with the 10 of Pentacles, has lots of themes of the end of a material process. It also speaks towards the passing on of a legacy to the next generation. So what legacies are we passing on? We may be reflecting upon what values we want to pass on to the next generation. We may be reflecting on how do we want to be remembered by history, having lived through these times. You know, oftentimes as we reflect upon the past, we say, well, why didn't people do this during this period of time that was crisis? Or why didn't people take this action to prevent this atrocity? And I mean, I think that one of the simple facts is some people did, and other people were just trying to live their lives and figure out how to, move from day to day. And then some other people just kind of had their head in the sand and didn't do anything. So you might be asking yourself, what do I want my role to be in how I'm remembered historically in this time period? Do I want to be someone that spoke up against atrocities, that spoke up for equality and spoke up for peace and for pushing back against tyranny and authoritarianism? Or am I going to be remembered as being complicit and just kind of going along with it because it didn't affect me, quote unquote, personally, which is not really true because we are all connected through a mycelial spiritual network, in my opinion. All right. Mayor says, I'm cutting back on sugar and other vices. Mars at 9 degrees Taurus in my sixth. Yeah, so this is I like the wording that you use there, Mayor, because the second decan of Aries talks about virtue and vice. So we could be reviewing what our virtues are. We could also be releasing from some of those vices. It's interesting you talk about sugar. I'm not a huge sugar person myself, but Tanya brought home some cookies from the farmer's market that someone gave her for free, and the temptation has entered the house, and it may be difficult to resist during this initial Venus retrograde period. Actually, it makes a lot of sense. Here's how I would see this going. The cookies come into the house that haven't been there for a while. The sugar comes back into the house. Venus retrograding. Maybe you engage with it, or maybe I engage with it. I'm speaking personally. And I discover that it actually doesn't bring me a sustained pleasure. And because my body feels bad, I probably feel tired, probably make my skin break out, all of these things. I'm anticipating all these things in advance. And it may be a subtle reminder that it may reaffirm the values that I had before. I think this is a really important way that we see Venus retrogrades play out, is that sometimes we will return to something that might not be good for us during the period to reaffirm why we let go of it in the first place. This is why you see like exes coming back into your life. Sometimes an ex will come back into your life to show you why it just isn't going to work out. Sometimes absence makes the heart grow fonder, and we tend to idealize the person after they're gone. And them actually coming back into our experience, even if it's temporarily, it can kind of show us why it didn't work out in the first place. So, you might have to, every once in a while, when we are able to beat an addiction or a vice, sometimes we have a little cheat day or something like that to remind us, like, ugh, that doesn't make me feel good. This was true for me, and with alcohol. Like I was never a big drinker or anything like that, but I did have one experience in high school where I ended up in the hospital with alcohol poisoning. And after that, I didn't enjoy it. The smell of it made me really sick. But there were, every once in a while, like I would try a little sip of something, and then it would make me feel terrible. And I'd be like, okay, that's why I don't do that, But I think that could be true for this Venus retrograde cycles. There may be something that we're re-engaging with. But I support you in your endeavor, Mayor. I think that learning about what we need to let go of, I think, is important, whether it's through just practicing asceticism, right? Or practicing letting go of something, or through just engaging with it briefly so that we understand that it's not for us anymore. All right. Steven says his older brother is quite goth and punk and has interesting tastes. Well, there you go. That confirms some of our earlier musings about his decorating tastes. All right. So we've got that full moon lunar eclipse that's going to be part of this retrograde cycle. And then we have Mercury stationing retrograde the day after that. So here now Mercury joins the retrograde party. Again, reviewing that will be affecting not only the Aries area of our life, but instead of the Libra and Taurus area of our life, it may be affecting our Virgo house and our Gemini house. Now, if we were to take our same justification for which house it may have a stronger effect on, it is witnessing our Gemini house, but it does not witness our Virgo house. So it may have more of a stronger effect on the topic related to Gemini than to Virgo. So a distinction there. Not that it won't have an effect on the Virgo house. Sometimes a planetary ruler that's in aversion, I mean, maybe there are other secret connections like Anticia or Contra Anticia potentially to that house. There may be a more of a secret connection potentially. Mayor says, I am an emotional eater. I need to reevaluate my habits, being mindful. Mayor, I also am an emotional eater. I have worked very hard to cut out things that weren't healthy for me. But I definitely feel comfort from food as a Taurus moon and a Cancer sun. So I totally understand that. And you know what? I think there's a need to just be gentle with yourself through the process. I think that with a lot of the stress that we're going through, there are worse things than eating something to feel better. But I also think if it's something that you're serious about, just one day at a time, and it's not a linear process. I have found that when I add things in to replace the things that I don't want to eat, I start to feel a lot better. As far as the sugar detox thing, I had a lot of success with the Whole30 diet, which would actually be a really interesting thing to start for a Venus retrograde cycle, because the Venus retrograde cycle is about 40 days. And the Whole30 talks about doing things for at least 30 days to change your palate and to change your habits. And it's just sort of cooking with less sugar and less processed foods. That can be something that could be very helpful. I would say, like, just as far as stress goes, I've been having some success with some ashwagandha tea recently. I've been drinking this yogi tea, stress support, and instead of drinking like a bunch of caffeinated things, I'm drinking things that calm me down. And I've found that makes me slightly less angry or reactionary to some of the things that I'm experiencing, not only from the collective, but I think it helps me in client work, and it helps me in this work that I do here. If there's a challenging opinion or contrary opinion that comes up, I think it helps me to deal with it a little bit more gracefully in the moment, which is hard to do sometimes. Sometimes we get triggered by things, and finding our center can be quite challenging. Yeah, just told yourself one day at a time. Absolutely. Okay, so that's our Mercury retrograde station. And then let's keep going through this. Then we have our Cazimi. So our Venus Cazimi is on March 22nd. So here is, we've got the spring equinox, March 21st, 20th or 21st, and then the conjunction around the 22nd. So this is going to happen. I'll just show you the aspect completely. Sun conjunct Venus. There it is. 2 degrees of Aries. So this is the renewal in the heart of the sun. This might be a moment of realization, a moment of the beginning of a return of strength or vitality. I think the period of time between March 1st and March 22nd could be a little bit exhausting. But I think we might start gaining energy and steam around this Venus Cazimi. We might have a new realization, a new, like just taking the metaphors that we've been talking about. Maybe this is the moment, if you're doing a protocol like Whole30, where you start to just feel really good after the initial days of maybe feeling a little bad, like detoxing from things like too much sugar in your diet, right? The first week or so probably is a little bit painful. Just like, being stripped of our adornments like Inanna going into the underworld can be painful. So I think here we might start to reap some of the benefits of our efforts. We also have Venus retrograding back into Pisces very shortly after this on the 27th. So here's Venus moving back into her exaltation on the 27th and joining up with Neptune. Now, I had previously talked about this aspect being um, just a brief moment of beauty, and maybe not something necessarily to build your entire life around, but something that could be a moment of grace, like an ephemeral rainbow. The third decan of Pisces has a card associated with it, the Ten of Cups, that shows a sort of a scene of an idealistic family or something of that nature dancing under a rainbow. And it's not something permanent, but it might be something to appreciate in the moment. I know that when Venus was conjoining Neptune, I had a nice time with my dad playing a game about birds online together. We hadn't spent a lot of time together, and traveling is difficult, I think, sometimes to get to one another's space, and we were able to carve out some time, and we had a nice experience. And it wasn't something that we are building our lives permanently around, but it was kind of an idealistic kind of thing. So then we get Mercury. I'm sorry, I keep saying Mercury for some reason. Mercury's trying to get me. Mercury says, I am in Pisces right now. I'm going to confuse details. Venus then emerges as the morning star right here at about 27 degrees of Pisces, conjoining the North Node and very close to Mercury. So here we have this moment of phasis, right? And we are seeing this reemerging of visibility. And we go back to our phasis and speed here. Here we have the morning rise as the morning star, the first appearance, rebirth, okay? And it's at almost the maximum degree of exaltation. The degree of exaltation of Venus is 28 degrees Pisces. And having that be conjoining the North Node, all right, conjoining Mercury, you also notice that our good friend Neptune is not necessarily part of the conversation. Neptune will have ingressed into Aries by this point. So maybe this is a moment of clarity, right? An increase of our idealism, an increase in our ability to dissolve the boundaries that separate us, especially with its conjunction with the North Node, which is a significator of desire, increase, search for immortality. Okay, could be a beautiful moment. Then we have Venus stationing direct at 24 degrees of Pisces on April the 12th. And it happens just as it's making a conjunction with Saturn. So there's a very Venus-Saturn flavor to its direct station. Oftentimes, Venus and Saturn coming together can mean one of two things. Well, it could mean many things, but two things that stick out to me is Saturn can generally concretize or castrate things into existence. So it could be making a dream real. It could be the elimination of other possibilities to make one particular dream real. It could also signify endings. Maybe during the Venus retrograde period, you did discover that what you were revisiting or reviewing wasn't right for you. And it could signify the ending of that particular phase or thing. And it could be emotional. It could be an emotional experience. Pisces 3 tends towards extremes of emotion, elation to the heights of elation to the depths of despair. One important thing to keep in mind with Pisces 3 is that even when you're experiencing all of the ills of being a human, it's important to maintain some kind of hope or faith in the future. That's one of the things that helps us to stay going. Elpis is the daimon or spirit associated with Pisces 3, and that translates to hope. Rachel's joining us. Hello, Rachel. Nice to see you. Joining us from Roanoke, Virginia. I love our little hedgehog friend there. I hope you're having a good afternoon, friend. Okay, so moving forward, after Venus stations direct, it will then move into Aries once again on April the 30th. So you can see it's moving forward. It crosses back over Saturn again. And then it starts to come together with Neptune in the early degrees of Aries. So here's our, it stations, it ingresses, into Aries on April the 30th. And then it conjoins Neptune on May 1st and 2nd. So pretty fascinating. The end of this cycle, or the end of this phase of the cycle, happens when we have Venus exiting its shadow on May 16th. So this will be when Venus is finally breaking new ground and visiting new degrees, 11 degrees of Aries here. So this is when sort of the story that we were reviewing becomes new again, potentially. I always like to see the echoes of what's happening in the other parts of the sky, and the sun is coming together with Uranus. So breaking new ground, but the new ground that we're breaking could be a little bit shocking or unexpected with the sun conjoining Uranus on a similar day that Venus is exiting its shadow. So that's sort of a look at the Venus retrograde. I did pull an I-Ching and an animal for you today, just to give us a guide. So here's the I-Ching. So I asked, what is the essence of the Venus retrograde cycle in 2025? And I got the hexagram number 45, which is gathering together. I like this one. This one was a little surprising, but I was happy to see it. Gathering together, massing, joining others, assembling, having a common cause, holding yourself together, pitching in, cooperation between leaders and followers. One of the things that I feel about the Venus and Aries period is Venus often glamorizes some of the themes that of the sign that it's moving through. And one of the things that we saw with Venus moving through Aries in the previous weeks was this glamorization of rugged individualism, of saying, well, we're going to strip away the social support systems, and because you just need to pick yourself up by your bootstraps and figure it out, and to me, this Venus retrograde is sort of maybe a backtracking on that, where maybe what we're learning is that we do need each other and that we do exist in a series of interrelated relationships with one another. And this hexagram seems to speak towards that. It says fostering unity takes skill and patience. In order to bring people together, whether in a community or a charitable organization or a business, you must give them a shared sense of purpose. You must give the group direction. Hence, the text says it is beneficial to have somewhere to go. Common goals, shared symbols, and shared beliefs unite individuals and let them feel that they are working for something more than selfish interests or petty concerns. It is the duty of leaders to install this sense of higher purpose. The text speaks of the king entering his temple. In ancient times, rulers would lead their people by making a sacrifice to their ancestors. This sacrifice reminded people that they had common origins and that together they were keeping faith with something noble and valuable. Calling upon common ancestors and invoking shared traditions was a powerful symbol of community, which constituted them as a single people with a common history and destiny. In the same way, if you are called to bring people together, you must instill in them a sense of shared history and purpose. You must give them something to believe in. You must bring a great offering, something that performs the same function as the offering to the ancestors that the ancient kings made. You must find symbols that people can rally around and that express their joint commitment. So I feel like we are working towards that right now. I think that with a lot of the pushback on the oligarchy through economic blackouts, etc., where those are saying what we don't want to be. Maybe during Venus retrograde period, we start to re-engage with the values that we do want to see. As an American, there were a lot of stories that we were told as young people about what this country should be about. There was lots of themes of it being a place of freedom, a place of the ability to worship in a diverse way, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of diversity. There was a lot of talk about it being a melting pot or something of that nature, where you had a lot of different cultures coming together and hopefully making it work with one another. Now, we can have a long discussion about whether those things were ever completely true. But I do think that there was at least some parts of that story that were aspirational for people in America, as far as being a place where you could come together with your neighbors and live free of oppression and tyranny of kings, I guess you could say. We definitely have reckoned with a lot of, or are reckoning with a lot of karma, and there is absolutely a dark side to that story. There is there has been vast amounts of collateral damage from that unfolding. But I do think that what we're seeing here today unfolding in our country and around the world is one of the most un-American things that we have ever experienced, as far as its ideals. Now, there will be people that will push back and say, well, America's always been like this, and now we're just seeing it laid out and laid bare. And you may have a good argument, but maybe there is something where we can agree on some values that would help us to shape a new experience moving forward, one that is more fair, one that is more diverse, one that is promoting not only racial and spiritual equality, but financial equality, economic equality. So all of these things are things that we can think about, and how we can gather together and figure out what kind of communities we want to shape. And crisis sometimes gives us that opportunity. Now, there is an animal that I pulled for you as well, and I thought it was pretty interesting. I got the cricket for you. And here is, I like using this image for the cricket. We've gotten the cricket once before in the past. And this is the cricket from one of my favorite books, The Cricket in Times Square, by George Selden. And it talks about an experience of a cricket from the country who finds himself almost by mistake in the city. And he's having some trouble fitting in, and he's trying to figure out where he belongs. And he falls in with this cat and this mouse. And he finds himself at this newsstand, right? And there's this big fire at the newsstand, and the cricket feels like it was his fault or something like that. And he starts to sing. He has this beautiful ability to rub his wings together and create beautiful, beautiful music. And he sings in times of great crisis. His singing helped uplift the spirits of the humans that ran that newsstand, that were mourning their loss. And I find this is a really poignant and powerful symbol right now, because what the cricket in Times Square was doing, he was pulling people out of their normal experience through the power of art, through the power of music, through the power of something that unified them. Here's like one quote. It said, "Just this once," this is while he's singing. It says, "Just this once, in the very heart of the busiest of cities, everyone was perfectly content not to move and hardly to breathe. And for those few minutes while the song lasted, Times Square was still as a meadow at evening, with the sun streaming in, and in on the people there and the wind moving among them as if they were only tall blades of grass. Oh, so good. Right? Um, Chester's playing filled the station like ripples around a stone dropped into still water. The circles of silence spread out from the newsstand, and as people listened, a change came over their faces. Eyes that looked worried grew soft and peaceful. Tongues left off chattering, and ears full of the city's rustling were rested by the cricket's melody. So I think the cricket is a symbol of good luck and good fortune in many cultures. I think it could be telling us that we need to make sure that we're still singing, even in periods of crisis, that we're still finding beauty. And maybe we take out a few moments to reconnect with our values of why we are doing what we are doing. Why do we create community? What is worth fighting for? Okay. What are we pushing against? What are we pushing for? What do we want to create? And what's the best way to do that? And the answers aren't always simple. They're not always immediate. And sometimes it can feel like we're just singing into a crowded subway station. But one little voice, one tiny bug, can create a great ripple effect of peace, calm, and change. So I think that the messaging here is to don't necessarily think that your actions don't matter, no matter how small they are. And I think that can be a really good reminder during this Venus retrograde. Kai says, wonderful metaphor. The American story that stitches a people into a whole cloth has been lost. We've all realized this fraying. Powers that would benefit from separation have pointed fingers and laid blame for rending the quilt asunder. But it is also a perfect time to weave new stories together that we've used together as a people. Yes, us together, that weave us together as a people. Yes, absolutely. And one of the things that is fascinating about the cricket in Times Square, I believe that there are all sorts of diverse characters in this story. You've got a Chinese character that is very prominent. The owners of the newsstand, I believe, were Italian immigrants. It's just something that shows us the beauty of all the different perspectives coming together and creating like that quilt that you're talking about that I think is very poignant. So remember to sing, friends, during this Venus retrograde. Remember to examine your values. Examine how you create in an individual world, an individual experience. Examine what is you and what isn't, what values are yours and what are not. It's okay to have values different than the quote-unquote collective. The test, the Rorschach test that you can take with that has to do with if you are doing harm or not through those values. If your values that are outside the norm or the collective harm other people, they're probably not sustainable values. If the values that you have are in service of the collective, or if the values of the collective are self-centered, then there's nothing wrong with embracing them. So I think that's what I've got for you today. Kind of a short but sweet one. We've got some really nice comments coming in here. Thank you so much for your participation today, friends. Stephen says, my hope is that we as a people can come together in a new way instead of a weaponization of differences. I agree, Stephen, 100%. I feel like as a student of nature, ecosystems are much stronger with diversity. Like you look at like farming. One of the great tragedies of American farming or industrial farming, it's not just American, is monocropping. You start to see the relationships that plants and animals have with each other that are very diverse, that play different roles within a healthy ecosystem. A monochromatic ecosystem or a monocrop ecosystem is not healthy. It's toxic, and it leads to all sorts of breakdowns. So how can we reinvest in seeing not only the beauty of diversity, but how it's what its utility can be as well. It helps things to work better. It makes us stronger, not weaker. And so I think that those are some good reflections as we move forward through the Venus retrograde cycle. All right, friends, I think that's what I've got for you today. Go follow me over on the socials at Spencer Michaud, over at Blue Sky. I'm on the other platforms. I'm on every platform that billionaires own, but we'll see if we have some more that will crop up over time. And of course, you can find me at spencermichaud.com. Sign up for the email list if you can. That's a great way to support your local content creators that are divested from some of these platforms that we are trying to push back against on. So sign up for the email list if you can. And I hope that you have a great Venus retrograde cycle. Just be patient. What I will say about March is there's probably going to be a lot of feelings that come up. There's going to be a lot of, fiery feelings where we might want to be making a new start. But I do feel that there's a lot of slowing down and processing that we have to go through first. And that's okay. Not everything has to be a rush to the finish line. And for a lot of periods, for much of human history, we didn't necessarily feel this drive towards constant change all the time. And while that may or may not have been true, it may have been a matter of perspective. I think reconnecting with things that are eternal and reconnecting with the center of our metaphorical wheels can really get us through these periods of time. So have a great afternoon, friends. Have a great Venus retrograde. Appreciate all of you. Thank you so much for these kind words. And thank you so much for being here today. And I will see you the next time. See you next week, okay? Take care. Peace.